أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتحدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الحمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين صاحب العصر والزمان خليفة الرحمن إمام الإنس والجان ولعن الله وعداهم أجمعين إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا وإن الله لمع المحسنين صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Our discussion last night in light of the program of celebration that we have, we spoke a little bit about the communal aspect of the deen, if all of you remember. We talked about reviving the ijtima'i portion of the deen, meaning the idea of the khidmat and service to mankind. That we've kind of lost our way in this individualism era where we're only worried about us and our journey towards Allah. We haven't truly kind of captured the idea that Islam was meant to be an ummah, a family of collective individuals. And the one takeaway from last night that I really want to emphasize a little bit more today and then move on to another topic was the idea of building a strong circle around you, a circle of influence. Be it your friends that you spend time with, or if you are searching for a spouse, then you search for a spouse with the right criteria. And I mentioned that, especially at a very young age, if you don't have the right circle around you, that circle can take you to a place that you yourself don't want to be at. But you're not strong enough to fight that tide moving this way. What's easier is to surround yourself from the very early ages of your life around right people who take you towards Allah with them. I presented to you a verse from Surah Al-Ankabut last night, and I want to present to you one more from Surah Furqan that got left behind in last night's talk. And then address a little bit about a discussion on Abu Fazl Abbas alayhi salatu wa salam. Sallu ala Muhammad. The verse is a very powerful one. I mentioned last night that there are certain things in the Quran that Allah has chosen to leave at a very kulli level, at a level of a principle. Then there are other discussions where Allah gets into the nitty-gritty details of it. One of them is this verse of Surah Furqan, describing those individuals who will end up in the hellfire in the hereafter. Okay? And they'll be asked, what happened in this dunya that you're now in this state in the akhirat? And of all the things that they could complain about, if they reflect back at their 60, 70 years of life in this dunya, of any sort of complaint they might have, the Quran presents one complaint that they themselves, the Ahl Nar and Jahannam, present to those who are asking them what happened. And they start off by having some self-pity. It says, Ya waylata, Ya laytani, oh unto me, woe unto me. Meaning, if I can, what was I thinking? If I can use today's translation. Lam attakhiz fulanan khalila. Very carefully. If only I didn't take that fulan to be my khalil, to be my friend in this dunya, I wouldn't be in the state that I am in today. of anything that this individual who is now destined for the hellfire could complain about, he could have complained about anything. I live in the West, there's no community, my parents weren't really God-fearing. I lived in this area and that area and the West, 1,001 excuses. The one thing that they could reflect on that caused them to have a horrible akhirat was if only I didn't take that fulan to be a close friend of mine. That's the power of the circle of influence. The verse goes on, وَلَقَدْ أَضَلَّنِي عَنْ ذِكْرِي بَعْدَ إِذْ جَاءَنِي. That friend of mine was that person that led me astray from the dhikr, from the remembrance of Allah, بَعْدَ إِذْ جَاءَنِي, meaning after it was already clear to me what the right path was, what the wrong path was. This guy in my life took me from this path and put me on the path of the hellfire. And the Quran very openly talks about the idea that this is the major complaint of those who will end up in the hellfire. So we have to choose our circle very carefully. I mentioned that there are some of you that I know that are in destructive friendships, that are doing nothing for your spirituality. And I don't want to spend too much time on that today, but it is enough for you to ponder and stop and think. Who do I spend my time with? And when I'm with them, am I a better person? Do they bring out the God in me or bring out the shaitan inside of me? Do they encourage those things that I want to do that are khair and good? Or do they encourage those things that I don't want to do, but sometimes I'm forced to do? And there's pages, guys, pages of our hadiths on friendship, on who to befriend, who to not to befriend. All these things about the Prophet saying that a group of friends are what? Are a group of bodies attached to one soul. Or another hadith where you are bound to accept the deen of your friends. Deen here means lifestyle. You're bound to be impacted and affected by those around you. And so one thing I really want to emphasize based on tonight and again today is examine your circle of influence. If you are in the market for a spouse, choose your spouse properly. Don't be caught up in the individualism lifestyle of the West. The deen was always meant so you could help out each other. Break this idea of mind your own business, each his own, and worry about the person beside you. Sometimes we don't understand that my personal journey towards Allah includes taking somebody else towards Allah as well. A very simple example that my teacher in the house used to give to me, and it really stuck to me. He talked about the rotation of the earth. Okay? Those of you who are into astronomy. The earth, as you know, rotates around the sun. Right? You guys are pretty lucky, mashallah. Rotates around the sun. It also has its own rotation as well. So it has two rotations, as far as I've been told. One rotation is on its own axis. In that halat of rotation, it rotates around the sun as well. Correct? A beautiful lesson for us. We also are rotating in our own deen as well. What we don't realize is sometimes in the state of our own personal rotation, we must also rotate around others as well. And that helps us. When you guide somebody else, you're simply guiding yourself. It's a very simple concept. But if you have no one to sit there and remind you or you remind them, there's no hidayat happening whatsoever. And in this age, in this era, we are in desperate need of surrounding ourselves with the right people, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I want to spend a little bit of time today in speaking about a topic that I enjoy, for lack of a better word, I enjoy speaking about. And one that I find is very relevant to today. And if you've heard any of my lectures online, you know it's a topic I really enjoy talking about. It's a topic of courage. And perhaps, and not on purpose, on purpose, perhaps it's munasib that we are here. One of the persons we're here to celebrate is Hazrat Abbas. And his shuja'at is very well documented in Shairi and of course in history as well. But sometimes there's a misconception about the idea of courage in Islam. And I want to present to you initially a verse from the Quran, a very powerful verse from the Quran. Sometimes you come across those ayat of the Quran and you stop and you think to yourself that this verse could have been revealed today and still would have been relevant. Right? We know enough to know the ijaz and the miracle nature of the Quran is different like any other miracle of any other prophet. All the other prophets had their miracles that existed during their time. They left the world, their miracle also left the world. Be it Nabi Isa's ability to revive the dead or cure the sick, Nabi Musa's transmission of a serpent from a staff, whatever the case may be. But the one miracle that lasted beyond the prophet itself was the Quran. It is that miracle that will last ila yawm al-qiyamah, to the day of judgment. And there are several reasons I don't have time for. It's not a Ulum al-Quran class. But one of them is that it's relevant for all eras and all times and all people, the Quran. That you pick up the Quran in any era across the 1400 years, and a group will always find the verse to be relevant. I found this one to be very relevant to our time. Surah Hajj, verse number 11. Talks about individuals who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not the mushrikeen, not the munafiqeen, not the kuffar. These are people who have worshipped and are worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It says, what? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ عَلَى حَرْفٍ. From amongst the men who worship Allah ala harf. Harf in Arabic means the edge of a cliff. Okay? So if you picture somebody on the edge of a cliff, they're inches away from going down. This verse starts off by saying there are those amongst the people, amongst the men who worship Allah again, worship Allah, but they worship Allah on the edge of a cliff. وَأَصَابَهُمْ خَيْرٌ إِتْمَعَ النَّبِي. So long as there's khayr and good, there's itminan from me and my worship for Allah. There's sukoon, there's serenity, there's calmness. Allah, you give me good news, I'll give you my sujood. You passed me in my exams this week, and you have my salat. If I bomb the exam, you won't see me on Saturday for the hour. But the Quran goes on to say, فَإِنْ أَصَابَتْهُمْ فِتْنَةٌ إِنْقَلَبَ عَلَى وَجْهِهِ. Allah. But the moment a test comes to these people, a fitna comes. Fitna in Urdu is one thing, in Arabic is one thing. Fitna is not the Urdu version. Fitna in the Quranic verse means to test. When a test comes to these people who, on the edge of a cliff now, إِنْقَلَبَ عَلَى وَجْهِهِ. They turn their face away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. خَسْرَ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. They've lost the dunya, they've lost the akhirah. وَذَلِكَ هُوَ الْخُسْرَانُ الْمُبِينُ. And this is a huge loss. Khusran sighe mubaligha, it's a huge loss. Now again, imagine for a moment, this person is on the edge of a cliff. You know how vulnerable they are on the edge of a cliff. A little bit of a wind, a little bit of a nudge, and they're down the cliff. Okay? And so long as them and Allah are good, they will continue to worship Allah. But the moment that there is one more piece of bad news, Allah, I'm out. I'm out. One more broken engagement, one more miscarriage, one more diagnosis of cancer, one more failed interview, one more, whatever, broken rishta, anything, forget it, Allah, I'm done. My hijab is off, my beard is shaved, my name is changed, I denounce my religion on Facebook, I'm done. I can't take it anymore. So you do your parts, and you're sending me khair and good. Let me marry the girl I want to marry. Let us have the kids when we want to have it. Give me that job. Heal my mother. Blah, blah, blah. Khair, khair, khair. You have my worship. And you have my itminan as well. But the moment one more test comes, and I turn my face away from it. Meaning what? You're the slave of Allah, and I become the master. I dictate to you what I want done by you. You come and do it, and we're good. You don't listen to my commands, na'udhu, then we have a problem. This entire phenomenon of atheism, and today's youth calling themselves agnostics, and these big terms that they don't even know how to spell sometimes, comes from the idea that they have this belief that my belief in Allah has to equate a very easy, problem-free life. How can I believe in Allah and still have the dunya smack me in the face? Why is it not the fact that the higher I go up the ladder of Allah, the easier my life gets? It was never promised to you like that. Nobody ever said to you that so long as you prostrate to Allah, this dunya will leave you alone. In fact, quite the opposite was told to you. Through the seerah of every single prophet, every single imam, you've seen your parents struggle. And it's a point I make all the time. I ask my immigrant parents out there. Sometimes it's important that you tell your children your story. Tell them your story. Sometimes I sit there with my elders and I just pick their brain. And I ask them, tell me your story. Where were you before this? How'd you get here? This and that. It's a fascinating story. For them to pick up, and I always say this, it's important that all of my youth, and especially me, because I come from a typical immigrant family from Pakistan. My father arrived in the early 70s. And I don't think even us, our generation, realizes the difficulty that our parents did to come and set up shop here. They left the confines of and the comfort of their home and their culture and their language to come here and learn a brand new language and learn a culture and be ridiculed and have their name destroyed by some random white guy at work 7 days a week, odd jobs, any job, just to provide food, just so what? My kids can educate themselves in this part of the world. Tell your kids that story. Because you did something that my generation could never do, I'm sorry. We don't even move within the same country, forget across the ocean. The edge of a cliff. So there has to be the idea that as long as I worship Allah, there has to be khair coming from you. But the reality is that you look at the sayings of the Holy Prophet, the Prophet says what? The higher I went towards Allah, the more the dunya tested me. The more it gave me aziyat. It bothered me. Imam Ali's laqab is what? Awwal al-Madloom. Not that he was the first Madloom, but the dhulm done on Ali alayhi salam was high. This whole equation in the ayat doesn't make sense for those who believe in Allah. And it points to a bigger issue, and that bigger issue is that these are people, and I'm sure there are people in this room right now who are right now on the edge of a cliff. They've lived a very difficult life. It seems like the entire target of the dunya is on my chest. And everyone else is living pretty. White picket fence, great family, kids married where they want to marry, secure job, everything is great. But everything I do for some reason, it has to be like pulling teeth. And so there are people maybe you yourself, who are right now, who are ala harf, on the edge of a cliff, barely hanging on to the rope of Allah. And it points to a bigger issue, and that bigger issue is that when we submit to Allah, we have to submit to Allah as a complete and absolute submission. We don't need partial submitters today. We need, the idea of us submitting, having what? Taslim mutlaq, absolute submission. Ala kulli hal, in every state, I submit to you, Allah. Not only when things are bad, not only when things are good, no. We have to be able to understand that the deen is not a buffet table, guys. You approach the buffet and you take the chicken, you take the steak, you leave the broccoli, you leave the patte and the ghas, and those carrots and cucumbers, you go towards the mash and the gravy, or if it's a desi buffet, oh my goodness. We start with nahari, we end with biryani, we have the seekh kebab, right? For my Iranian friends, we have a little juje, a little kubi day, right? Beautiful, sabzi khulish, it's very nice. And we leave and we go back and we keep getting those things, that's great. It's not like that. The deen does not say, look, you can take a few things and leave a few things out. There's a child right now in this room who will go in and out of this hall. After about 15, 16 times, an uncle would grab him by the neck, right? There's always one uncle in every community, right? Sometimes 2 or 3. Grab them by the neck and say, look, beta, either you're in the majlis or you're out of the majlis. The deen says the exact same thing. Either you're in the deen or you're out of the deen. If you're in the deen, it's not 1 foot in the deen and 1 foot out of the deen. I'll take the idea of hijab, no problem. But marjiyah doesn't make sense to me. Khums doesn't make sense to me. I'll pay khums, I won't do taqleed. I'll do taqleed, I won't wear hijab. I'll wear hijab, I won't pray fajr. I'll do this, so a little bit by bit, the masala and the biryani and everything, whatever is easy for me. That's not the taslim and submission we need today. Today especially, we need a complete jumping in with 2 feet. Provided that you understand that the deen of Islam is the path that you need. And that's where the courage comes in. Because courage has nothing to do with physical strength. Nothing to do with physical strength. We believe courage is how many bodies can you lay out. How many enemies have you killed on the battlefield? We believe that Imam Ali's shaja'at is only on Badr and Uhud and Khandaq and Khaybar. Look at the example of Abbas. Such a beautiful example. This was a man who was a giant of a man. A physically huge individual. Chosen by Imam Ali for the day of Ashura. Went to his brother Aqil, who was an expert in genealogy. Go and find me a tribe, you know the story, who is known for their bravery, and their courage, and their strength, and their loyalty. Find me a woman there, let me marry her, let me have a son, and let me designate that son for my son Hussein on the day of Ashura. We hear about these things every Muharram, and they're not exaggerations. That he would stand, Abul Fazl, and the horse would ride under him. That's how big he was. Do we ever stop and wonder how is it that he got to Furat to begin with? That very famous image that sometimes Iranian artists actually sketch on rugs, where he has water inside the palm of his hand. Meaning he got to the banks of Furat. You've been to Karbala, I'm sure. You know that Furat has a little bit of a dip when you get there. You go downhill to Furat and then back uphill. How did he hold off the enemy for that long, where 30,000 people were held off while he went down to Furat, filled the musk, filled his hand up, and still went back up? Stop and wonder these things. The point was, don't let water get to Hussein's khayma tent. Don't let water, not a drop of water. Somehow this man fought his way. And history says there was no battle. The moment they saw Abbas enter the Maidan, they split, they ran. And like the sea, it parted, and he went right to Furat. On the way back, however, is when he was ambushed. But think about his state, please, for a moment. Outside the Messiah, a little bit of your intellect. He was 32, 33 the day of Ashura, Abu Fazl Abbas. His ode of Javanian youth. Okay? Passion, emotion, immense love for Imam Hussein. And he knows that if I get 1 second of ijazat, this entire history will change. At the same time, he's hearing what? Al-Atash, Al-Atash. He loves Sakina very dearly. At the same time, he's watching his Mawla Hussein's lips get drier and drier by the second. You would think his Javani would take over. He used to beg Imam Hussein, Mawla, give me that ijazat. I can end everything right now. And he had the skill set of his father, Imam Ali. So he had everything from his blood, to his veins, to his skill set, to his stature, to his physical, to his strength, to his ata'at, to his walayat, to his love. Everything he had. And he had the age at 33 years old. Someone like me would lose myself. If I saw my family right now, in front of me now, deteriorating, and I knew I could change it. But Imam Hussein kept telling him, Abbas, we're not here for that. We're not here for that. Put your sword away, put your sword away, put your sword away. And every single time he did. And there came a moment where he was at a crossroads. And that crossroads for Abu Fazl is a huge lesson for us. One path is what I want. I want to bring water to Sakina. I want to quench my Mawla's thirst. I want to destroy the enemy who wants to destroy my Mawla. That's one path. The other path is what the deen wants at that moment. What the wali of your time wants at that moment. What the hujjat of your time wants at that moment. And it is an absolute conscious decision between what I want and what God wants. What I want and what God wants. And what true courage is, guys, shuja'at, true shuja'at in Islam, is to ignore what I want and tread the path of what God wants. Look at Imam Ali's history now. Again, history all of you know very well, better than I do, mashallah. In Medina, 10 years, 80 plus wars against Rasulullah. Minor, major, skirmishes, flat-out wars, whatever. 80 plus history says, correct? And Imam Ali Zulfiqar was very busy in Medina. Exception of one war, they say Tabuk, he wasn't there. Every other Jundin war, full front and center was in Maulana Ali. His Zulfiqar, like I said, was very karam, as you would say in Shairi. The Holy Prophet passes away, Saqifa happens, the door of the three Khulafa happen, Zulfiqar is very quiet. And he had every right to pull out Zulfiqar and get his Khilafat back. Please understand my point. All history. Sometimes we think that he was quiet, Imam Ali. Yes, his sword was quiet, but he was very vocal. His wife was very vocal. That were you not in Ghadir, were you not in Ghadir, were you not in Ghadir. Pick up Khutbah Shaykh Shaqiyah, Khutbah number 3, Najib Allah. You can feel the pain of Maulana Ali. He compares the Khilafah to a shirt. He says another individual wore this shirt that doesn't even fit him properly. It wasn't a shirt meant for him. He put it on. And I'm waiting for my God-given right to come back to me. Old have died off, the young have become old, I'm still waiting. That if I pull up my Zulfiqar and fight for my Khilafat, people would say that Ali was what? Hungry for power. If I put the Zulfiqar away, they'll say Ali was fearful of death. Where does he go? So difficult, so painful. And yet the Zulfiqar didn't come out until his own Khilafat al-Zahiri of 4.5 years and 3 civil wars. But during the dawn and the era of the 3 Khulafa, his Zulfiqar was very, very quiet. He had ample opportunity. This is Maulana Ali. He couldn't get his Khilafat back in a second. He gets it back. Abu Sufyan comes and says, Ali, this is not their Khilafat. You say the word and me and my henchmen will flood the streets of Medina with blood. And I'll get that Khilafat back for the Bani Hashim. He had his own motives. Someone like me, this is my God-given right snatched underneath me, right in front of me. It doesn't matter who's coming to me offering to bring that back, I'd say, let's do it. You and I, for one day only, we're boys. No problem. Get my Khilafat back for me. I want it. But he never did that. Because he knew what? Islam was in its infancy stage. That Rome, Iran, back then were waiting for the Prophet to leave this world. Because they believed the Prophet would leave and Islam would leave. That's why one of the most beautiful laqabs of the day of Ghadir is the day of the hopelessness of the enemy. They really thought the death of Rasulullah would be the death of Islam until Man Kunta Mawla. And now the deen is revived, and the deen is now placed in the hands of this silsila imamat that would keep it until the day of judgment. And many historians have argued that all those battles that he won, from the Badrs to the Ahaz, the Khaybars, Hazar Salam, no doubt. But Ali's true shaja'at came in the door of the 3 Khulafa. Again, he was my khilafat, me, what I want, and what the deen needs from me. And he knew if I pull my Zulfiqar out and start a civil war, Islam wouldn't survive at this precious stage. Rome was waiting to pounce. Iran was waiting to pounce. So he put the Zulfiqar away. I'm not saying he supported anybody or accepted anybody. His vision was the deen, and the deen only. But look at the courage of Imam to choose a path of God over my own choice. People who worship Allah ala harf are not people who have made that choice. And today the same choice is in front of all of you. The exact same choice is in front of all of you today. A path that God wants for you, a path that you want for yourself. And sometimes you are at a crossroads, sometimes on an hourly basis in this dunya. A 20-year-old today is at a crossroads. What do I do? And true courage is the one who chooses the path of Allah and quiets his shahwa and desire inside of him. That's the beauty of shuja'at. And that's what we need. We need that courageous deen today. The deen is dying for the submission that's completely absolute, not a buffet table style submission. I'll take what's easy for me, I'll leave what's not easy for me. Since when do we shy away from what's hard? We are the ones that celebrate these individuals who took on a very difficult task. Let's say one more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And I know that the effort is there. Wallahi, I know the effort is there. I travel enough up and down North America, and I belong to, I preach to a generation that really is thirsty for the deen. They ask me questions that, my elders would never dream of asking, because they never had that culture when they were growing up in India, Pakistan, or Iran, to approach the alim from the member, off the member, and ask a question. Sometimes I'm not even off the last step, and I get surrounded by the youth. And they want to know, can you explain this further? What about this? I don't agree with this. I have youth who, they send me long emails, I keep long emails about why they didn't agree with my majlis tonight. But that's beautiful. That's the convo I like, right? That's the back and forth that should be there. Like, they text me, they WhatsApp me, they tweet me, they stop me at Costco, wherever they can see me, to ask me a question. Right? I'm picking produce and they're asking me, can you a question about, let me pick my oranges, and you can ask me questions. But the problem is that while they have this thirst for knowledge, they have an ego as well, I'm sorry. And that ego sometimes doesn't allow them to accept an answer. And they believe sometimes, not everyone, that I'm not going to blindly follow certain parts of the deen. Until you can convince me why I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm not going to do it. And that's one thing I really want to remove from all of us tonight, especially myself. The true submission to Allah is to accept that whatever comes down from that Creator, I say labbaik to. Whether I have the dharfiyat and the capacity to understand it or not is not a prerequisite. Asad, convince me first and then I'll think about it. From God to salat to hijab to marjiyah to khums to everything. Convince me why I should do this. And right now you're not ready to be convinced. You look at some of the questions that were asked to the Ahlul Bayt, to the Imams. The Imams had a very open door policy, very approachable. Atheists would come and knock on the door of our sixth Imam. And he would answer them. And sometimes that one answer alone would be enough for them to change their entire faith. One answer alone. Hours of debate and bahas with today's youth sometimes isn't enough. But only goes so far. There comes a moment where you have to tell yourself, you know what, I don't get it. But I know it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's enough for me to say labbaik. If Allah opens up the doors of yaqeen for me, alhamdulillah. But it's not like I have to have yaqeen and then I'll do amal. No. If the amal comes from an entity that you already accepted at the aqli level, then whatever comes down from him, Chash, we don't say a single word. We don't challenge. Yes, it's good to ask. It's good to ask. And you give the answer. Maybe you're not ready for that answer. A lot of times I would ask questions to my Asadeen in the house. A lot of times I would ask to my teachers, and they would give me an answer, and I was like, I don't get it. It's like, you will get it. Let it digest. Let it kind of hazm a little bit. Let it marinate a little bit. And then inshallah it'll come. But the idea that I will not do this amal until I'm convinced is ghurur. And that ghurur, that ego, has to be removed in today's society. Because we need to have individuals who submit to Allah in a complete and absolute basis. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Khutbah Hammam, Khutbah Muttaqeen. In Nahj al-Balagha 193, very famous khutbah. All of you know the khutbah very well. Hammam comes to Imam Ali, the mullah describes who the muttaqi are. He gives a very simple answer. Fear Allah, do good from the Quran. And Hammam says, that's not enough, I want more. So he gave him more. Pages and pages and pages of a khutbah. In the beginning he says that Hammam, you should know that whatever comes from your Creator is for your benefit. Has nothing to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. your ibadat, your lack of ibadat doesn't affect his hukumat and his government. It's not like if someone like me decides to perform namaz al-shab every single day, from tomorrow, Allah becomes more Allah. No. Or God forbid, if I decide to leave the deen, Allah's kingdom will go down. No, He's azali, He's abad, I'm sorry. From day number one, He's been there, and day number last, He'll be there as well. Everything comes down from Him is for your benefit. What is an obligation? For your benefit. What's prohibited? For your benefit. It's just a matter of submitting. And that's the difficult part. And that's the part where I really want all of you to understand that in that same khutbah, he says that the people who are pious are who? The Ahlul Fada'il. They are the people of distinction. What do I mean by that? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Ultimately, we have a choice to make when it comes to our deen. Okay? And that choice is a very simple one. That choice is either I assimilate in this society, where I have no idea where my identity begins and this one ends, or I integrate. A little bit of my own value I hold on to. I also have some values of the West. I'm not one to bash the West, of course not. But there is a need for a balance. But today's day and age is a little bit different now, and I really want my youth today to understand what I'm trying to say. And if you don't agree, then grab me and ask me. There has to be a choice, and that choice is that do I want to fly under the radar, or am I okay with being a little bit distinct from the rest? What I mean by that is that, yes, when you don't engage in certain norms of this society, it makes you abnormal. Because now, what's happening right now is that what is the norm of today's society is becoming the abnorm of the deen. What is everyday is unheard of in Islam. Lifestyles, orientations, the glamorization of sin, the idea of certain acts that are unheard of 20 years ago now are very and common. And if you don't do it, then you're weird and they're not weird. If you don't engage in this act, what's wrong with you? Are you normal? Everything okay? Did you get that checked, bro? Everyone's doing it. And a choice that you have to make is either you go along and you camouflage yourself with that norm, and slowly but surely destroy yourself, or you become the Ahlul Fada'il, and a little bit distinct from everybody else. So in a room full of white t-shirts, you are that one red t-shirt that stands out. It takes a lot of courage to do that. I said, bro, you doing that? You're good. Good. You go do your thing. I'm good where I am. Because the point I've made several times is that some of us live multiple lives. And we have multiple identities. We come in through that door, we have a certain identity, a certain life, a certain mask on. We wear certain clothing, we have certain akhlaq, we have certain tahzeeb and etiquette and adab. But the same person, the same kid, the same youth on social media, I can't recognize them. The language being used, the things being shared, the things being forwarded. Their hashtags, can't recognize them. If I end up one day at your school, don't worry, I won't, but one day I end up at your school, and I see how you are at school, how you dress, who your boys are, how your friends are, how you talk, the language you use, I may not recognize you. If I see you at work with your Tom and your Jerrys and your Henrys, I may not recognize you. If I see you alone in your room at 2 o'clock in the morning when the whole world is asleep and you're awake, I may not recognize you. And that's the problem. That's the tiring part of it. Is that we want a little bit of both worlds. And we can't have both worlds. I'm sorry. Again, you don't have to agree. We can't have both worlds. Because the way this world is going is towards a complete and absolute bankruptcy of morality. And that's nothing new to all of you. Like, we put a price tag on human lives. A group, let's say, for example, is killed in one area, the entire world is in uproar. A week later, double the amount is killed in a more disgusting act, and the world is quiet. A handful end up, let's say, being killed in Europe, and there's Facebook filters. The same amount die in Kuwait, and there's no filters whatsoever, not even a hashtag. So we've put price tags. We've actually said this 5-year-old in Kuwait means nothing to me. This 5-year-old in France is everything to me. That's morally bankrupt. And we have a choice to make. We can either integrate and kind of camouflage in that and become immune to it and become that, or we become the red shirt. And that's the courage that we need. And it is a very difficult task, especially at 21. That's what the Imam today needs. I've always said this. All of these celebrations, everything we do is for one purpose, to prepare ourselves for Imam Zamana, and nothing else. And the Imam needs people of distinction. He needs people who are the Ahlul Fada'il. You know, sometimes our youth, I'll make one point here. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And I don't mean just distinction outside, sometimes within our own community's distinction. You know, when it comes to our 12th Imam, we talk about courage and shuja'at, preparing for his arrival. Everybody here wants to be beside him when he comes. There's not a person in this room that doesn't want to be one of his companions. But you have to work for it. And part of it is to have the proper mindset. The first mindset is, बहुत दूर की बात है. Allah के लिए दूर है बाबा. And that's not the case. If you read between the lines about the Rahbar speeches or the ulama or the Maraji, a little bit of in between the lines, you'll know that, you know, they can't put a date on it, obviously, but the world is moving towards that zuhur. You can see the picture forming. Now, the trap that sometimes our kids and our youth make is that they're attached to this 313 number. There's hashtags and there's hats and there's movies of the 313. And they believe for a moment that the Imam will only need 313. And so they've already told themselves, I'm not going to make that cut. There's at least 300 people who are much better than I am in this world. And so what you do right away is that you tell yourself, I'm not going to make that cut. So this idea of preparation and intizar and all these things are in the back of my head. That's for those khas 313. It's a misconception, but I really want to clear up today. Because the reality is that Imam Zaman's mission is global, as I mentioned to a few guys last time. It's global. It's global. Okay? We'll start off to be global. So a global mission requires a lot more than 300 some odd individuals. Yes, Hadith says 313, I'm not denouncing that figure. That figure is something else. The Imam will need thousands of people for his mission at various levels of khidmat and service. He has his ashab al-sir, he has his commanders, he has his ulama, he has his fuqaha, that's fine. But he has also people on the ground. And all that I want for myself and for all of you is in this dunya, before the arrival of the Imam, no, not after, not during, before the arrival of the Imam, is to do something in our life where the Imam takes a double take for us. See this individual? He's courageous. He's fighting the system. He's not allowing himself to be drowned into this bankruptcy. I can use him in my mission. I want that courage in my mission. I've always said this, I don't want 313, I can never deserve 313, but I just want nisbat to the Imam. That's all I want. That's all I want. Give me any role, Imam. Tell me to vacuum the carpets, I'll vacuum the carpets. Tell me to clean the bathroom of your ashab al-sir's cabins and rooms, I will clean the bathroom like the best of them. I just want the fact that when you come and you set up your hukumat and government and somebody passes by me and they say, see this big guy right here? He belongs to the Imam's army. He's their cleaner. And that's all I want. I want this one. And you need to understand that without asking the Imam for help, you can't get there. We're not waiting for the huzur of the Imam. We're waiting for the huzur of the Imam. That makes sense to you guys? He's hazir, he's just not zahir. He's with us. He's not accessible. We put him on some island or some planet or some faraway galaxy, untouchable, unaccessible, and there's this disconnect between me and the Imam of our time. And the thing that he requires is that courage. You look at the Ashab of Imam Hussein, it's immense courage. Like these things that you hear, these things are not like it's not like like a formality that Imam Hussein said on Shabi Ashur that you blow out the candle and you can go home now. Your wilayat is accepted, your jannat is wajib, everything is accepted. You can go now. They want my head, not yours. That wasn't just lip service of the Imam. The Imams don't give lip service. He even went so far to pair a Hashemi with one of the Ansar. They'll say, look, when I blow the candle and all of you are gone, make sure you Fulan, you take this Fulan back to me. He doesn't know his way back to Medina. You make sure you guide him back to me. He did all intizam for his companions to go back to Medina. That's how much he was. And he didn't, for a moment, sugarcoat anything. He told them everything, that you will die like this tomorrow. Even showed them. See that spot there? That's where you'll be trampled. That's where your ale will hit you here. That's where my aliyah will fall from the horse. That's where my Abbas's right arm will be chopped off. And one by one, all of them. He laid out an entire diagram for them. All before the day of Ashura. So no one can say, Hussein, you never told me. I didn't sign up for this. All of them thirsty and hungry. And oh, by the way, afterwards, your body will be trampled as well. So the ultimate disrespect. I'm giving you a chance. I accept your bay'ats. Everything is here. I'll blow up the candle. No sharab, no absolute no thing. You go. Go. And I'll even show you the path. Between those mountains, you go. Take your Ansar, take your Hashmi, and you go. Leave me for my journey towards Allah. Not one moved. Not one moved. Emotional scene, emotional moment. This is the Imam of your time. Not one moved. That's courage upon courage. Giving the life was an easy part, I'm sorry. Having yourself mentally ready. I say, we're not leaving your side, doesn't matter what they do. And you've heard all it 1,000 times. Trample my body, cut my body to pieces, give me life 1,000 times over. Labbaik, ya Hussein. There's no change. That courage is what Imam Azwana needs. That's distinction. Because you know that there were people Imam Hussein approached in Medina that would what? That would avoid eye contact with Imam Hussein. He would say, look, you know I'm going towards Kufa, you know what's happening, will you come with me? Well, Imam, I'm not really good with the sword, I have a lot of debts, I have family, I'm no good for you, but I'll pray for you, inshallah, from here. Another companion, quote unquote, would even go so far to say, look, Imam, I'm no good for you, but take my horse. Take my sword. Brand new, unused. Go ahead, it's all yours. I don't want your horse or your sword. I'm giving you a chance. I don't want you for me, I want you for yourself. There were even those companions that would accompany Imam Hussein from the 28th of Rajab in Medina all the way to the 2nd of Muharram. And he left Medina telling Imam Hussein, I'll come with you, but on a condition. The moment that I feel like things are going to be a lost cause, I want you to give me ijazat to leave. He says, no problem. I'm not going to force anybody. And this companion was with Imam Hussein the entire journey. All of you have traveled together with each other. You know that you find out realities of each other when you travel. Hajj groups, groups of ziyarah, they go, the best of friends, they come back the best of enemies. It happens. Imagine traveling that many days beside Imam Hussein. What level of ma'rifat and wilayat must you have when you reach Karbala? 2nd of Muharram, 4th Muharram, 6th, the 8th of Muharram now, this man is seeing thousands coming from Kufa and Sham on one side. And there's nothing happening inside of Imam Hussein. On the 8th of Muharram, he approaches Imam Hussein. He says, Maulana, we had a deal. It's like, yes, we did. He's like, it doesn't look good for you. If it's okay with you, I'd like to cash in on my deal and leave. He said, sure, no problem. You can go. But I don't have a means for you to get back home. He says, don't worry, don't worry. I have a horse that I have kept down the road just in case I might have to leave. On the 8th of Muharram, he got on that horse and he left. He left. 2 days away from being the ashab of the day of Ashura. The reason why I say that was, he chose to what? He chose to be those white shirts. Imam Hussein's companions chose to be those red shirts. And that distinction they have. From the day of Ashura till today, every Shab al-Jum'ah, every Zat al-Waratha. To the point where we've heard so much fadilat, we see what? Ya laytani kuntum ma'akum fa'afuza ma'akum. If only I was there with you, I would have attained that success. And we think that that chance left us. The chance is today, right now. Be people of distinction. Submit to Allah in totality. Don't be ala harf. Don't worship Allah on the edge of a cliff with a little bit of the wind and your iman is gone. Understand that yes, it's very difficult in this West to go against the norm. But you see what's happening in the society. But that's the courage and that shuja'at that the deen needs. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And this point was so important, last point I want to make. This point was so important that, again, and I want to do a little bit of dhikr of Imam Sajjad. You look at the fact that I mentioned yesterday, he was the only man that came to Karbala and left Karbala alive. And for 34 years, he had this gham of Karbala inside of his heart. And what did he do? He made sure that gham was never forgotten by anybody. He was almost obsessed with the idea. Didn't matter where he went, with who, khushi, gham, doesn't matter. He wanted to make sure that his father was always remembered. So people would invite him to their children's wedding. And he would say, no, please. It's fine, I'll come with one condition. That you have a poet write some poetry about my father. And you recite that poetry at the actual function. No problem, Mullah, we'll do that for you. And very famously, this poet would recite, and the Imam would begin to cry, and then he would stop the poet. Says, you're not reciting it properly. Recite the poetry as if my father's mayyat was right there in front of you. You know, this system that we have of Marsiya and Salam before the Majlis, a lot of my youth, think that, it's cultural. Even Hindu, I've heard, my God. Where we, there are 3 people in front of the Marsiya Khan Machada, right? Then we come when the khutbah starts, or when Masaib starts, or when Mandoha starts, when we're here, we think that for a moment that's a cultural thing. It's not. That's the sunnah of the Ahlul Bayt. It's precisely what the Ahlul Bayt did. Every Imam did that. When Muharram came, they would invite the best poet of their time and say, write couplets about the grief and the gham and the tragedy of my grandfather, of my Jad Hussein, and recite it. And recite it as if, like I said, you're on the plains of Ashura. And they would create this environment of Giriya, Buka, and tears and crying. Every Imam did that. Imam Sajjad was no different. Pass by an animal, you've heard 1,000, so pass by an animal being sacrificed. Did you get this water? We would never sacrifice an animal, Mawla, without giving him a drop of water. He would begin to cry and cry and cry. Why? Because my father was sacrificed without a drop of water. He would cry so much to the point where even his close ashab would ask him, Mawla, kab tak roenge? How long are you going to cry for? He would give famous answers of Nabi Yaqub's blindness of the eye, Sham. And it wasn't just about a son grieving for a father. Please understand that for a moment. My father passed away 15 years ago. And while I remember him dearly, I don't cry the way I cried the first year. Just it doesn't happen. You become to accept the fact. But he would cry, not cry, he would cry tears of blood until his very last moment. Until his very last moment. The 5th Imam narrates that my Baba was leaving this world. I was begging him to lie down on this cushion that I had for him. He was saying, well, remove the cushion, remove the sheet, put me on the khak. Why, Baba? Why, Baba? My father, Hussein, was killed on the khak of Karbala. Why do I deserve to be lying on a cushion in my last moments? 34 years after. All why? Because he wanted everyone to remember the courage of that day of Ashura. And see, it wasn't just meant to be an annual commemoration every single Muharram. It's meant to be applied. And applied to the young. Remember I mentioned, the one group that we find consistently throughout every marhala of the deen are the young. The Prophet's close companions, the young. The day of Ashura, the young. Imam Ismail's mission, hadith says, the young. You've given a golden opportunity. A golden opportunity. Ask my elders. I wish I was 20 years younger. Ask my elders. If only we were 20, if only we were 20. Those of you who are, that opportunity is there for you to invoke a little bit of courage inside of you. And be that red shirt inside the room. That's what the deen needs today. If that means there's a little bit of isolation from you and others, then I'm sorry, that's the price you pay for a bigger gain. If that means that you jump off social media because social media brings out the worst in you, then you jump off social media. Or if that means that you now take a different approach to social media, well now I'm going to use that to better humanity, to spread great stories, to spread good TED Talks, I don't know, then do that. But move away from the individualism and go towards the communal. And do it such that you know that I want to be that individual that submits to Allah mutlaqan, completely. Not ala harf. That's what the deen means. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to accept our qaleel or ibadat, inshaAllah. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to give us that tawfiq that in these very difficult and trying times for our youth, that you empower them, you give them that courage, that tawfiq, that inspiration now to be the Ahlul Fada'il, inshaAllah. We ask you, Allah, to forgive our sins in the month of Sha'ban and the sins of our marhumin and our parents. And finally, Allah, we pray for the victims of the flood in Iran. We pray for the victims of oppression all over the world, in Yemen, in Bahrain, in Palestine, in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, everywhere. And we know the one solution that we have is the arrival of our Imam. We ask you, Allah, to hasten that reappearance and to make us his ashab when he comes, inshallah. One announcement, if you don't mind, that we have a 10-minute break, as Mahdi Bhai mentioned. Afterwards, we'll have a discussion on strengthening our families. And what I have asked humbly from the organizers is to remove the partitions, to have an open dialogue. And what I would like, if possible, is if you've come with your families, to sit with your families while we have a discussion. When I say family, I mean you, your wife, and your children. If you don't want to, that's fine. So just so our sisters know that the partitions will be moved and we will be in one big hall. There'll be an interactive class, not on the mimbar, with a whiteboard, inshallah. If you can, please, if you're not sticking me just here, just stick around for one more session, inshallah. Then zahmat tamam, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Thank you.